All right, good afternoon. We will be discussing East Asia. Again, this is another video that you need to watch. You need to take notes over. You make sure you're doing the reading or at least listening to the reading. If I have put it on Google Classroom this week, I will not be covering it in class because we do not have time. We have to keep moving on if we're to finish by spring break. If the Lord wills, then after spring break, during our month and a half of review, I can maybe spend some time on this stuff. But for necessity, I'm relying on you to get most of that done. So anyway, we're doing East Asia. East Asia, remember, is China, Korea, Japan. That's what they consider East Asia. Now we'll deal with other players like the US and Russia, but the primary ones are China and Japan. As you can see on the map, here we have China, Japan. This area is considered East Asia. This is Southeast Asia, South Asia. But this is 1750, 1900. So there's a couple of major big things that happened in East Asia during this time period. This is what you need to know. Though they had been largely isolated from the rest of the world until now, China and Japan took very different approaches to opening up to the West. This happens during this unit. China will take a fat L and Japan will take a massive dub, right? So China will fall to economic imperialism. Japan will become an imperial Japan power. And while there's a lot going on here that you need to know, the two terms that are both in the textbook and on the exam description, the CED, are the Opium War, the first Opium War, and Hong Kong. Though there's a lot going on here, you must know those. Okay, well, here we go. Let's get started. This is I always like talking about East Asia because it's so important in world history. You know, for the longest time, China was the beautiful, prosperous, rich, culturally vibrant empire, right? Since we've talked about from the Song dynasty from 1200 to this unit, China was the big dog. It is in this unit, 1750, 1900, units 5 and 6, that it falls, that it becomes a loser. I mean, just in every sense of the term, right? And it would not regain any glory, arguably, until 1949 with the communist revolution there under Mao, if you can consider that glory. It certainly doesn't enter the world stage until my lifetime, the late 90s, right, when it starts to become a global economic power. And anyway, the downfall of China is happening here. Now, Japan. We know about Japan from world history because you talked about World War II and whatnot in your American history classes and surely in middle school. But Japan, of course, takes a different route. It was backward, culturally vibrant in its own way, but isolated from the rest of the world. It is at this unit that changes, where it becomes a major world power up until World War II, and becomes not isolated but interconnected. And today it is a global superpower economically, right? And so, anyway, all these changes are happening here. So it's very important you take notes and keep track of the developments that are happening in East Asia in this unit. So let's do a quick review and intro into China at home. So we are in the Qing dynasty. Remember, the Qing dynasty comes 17th century. After revolt and the fall of the Ming, Lai Cixin, right, the dashing king. I believe that's 1648. Peasant revolt, and the Ming fall. And then the Qing, the Manchu people, take over. Lai Cixin, he's out, and then the Manchus take over. And that's in the late 17th century. So we're starting about 100 years into their reign. And they're still very vibrant culturally and very powerful. It is at about 1800 that they have reached their peak, honestly, under the Qianlong emperor, who is considered the emperor of the Qing dynasty. They still maintain a very powerful tributary system. Remember, they have states around them that they keep in check, and those states pay tribute. If not, they get invaded, right? In order to unify the Qianlong emperor, the Qing, remember, they have a very strict dress code, mannerisms. Confucianism is a state-supported religion, remember, and ideology. total subservience to the state, to the emperor, just like in the house, total subservience to the man, the head of the household, is very rigid, those gender and those family roles. They are still implementing the civil service examination. So if you want a good job in the government, you have to be studied in Confucianism. The Qianlong Emperor, however, will be out in 1795. It is that next year that the White Lotus Rebellion begins. This is a millenarian revolt. It's led by Buddhists, who is an apocalyptic one. They believe that the Buddha was to return, right, and start his new reign on earth. Now, if you remember when we looked at the Monkey King story, in that story, I don't know if you remember the video, but it's about Buddha returning. This is a typical like story, you know, like Jesus is coming back. This is something you hear in Chinese Buddhism often, that the Buddha is going to return, a very apocalyptic view. And apocalypse just means revealing in Greek. It's not a scary thing. It's that Buddha's coming back, like we would say Jesus is coming back from the book of Revelation. Revelation in Greek is translated apocalypsos, right? So this is a millenarian, a very religiously driven movement. They are not just they don't just believe that the Buddha is going to return, though. There's things that have triggered his return. Heavy taxes, right? The Qing dynasty is at its greatest extent. China proper is huge, and the tributary states are surrounding it, like Vietnam, Tibet, Mongolia, Korea, places like this. And so they have to raise taxes to defend them and to keep their borders intact. They're also experiencing rapid population growth. Remember, they have imported corn from the Americas, and so they're growing foods that are very caloric and nutrient dense. And they are having some technological and medicinal advances as well. And so you have birth rates increasing and babies living to adulthood, right? And so from like 1800 to 1900, we will see 100 million more people in just 100 years. That's insane, right? That's a million a year. That's incredible population growth. But this does put a strain on the economy and on agriculture. So China, except for its river valleys, is pretty like bad agriculturally. Remember, this is something we continue to come back through in Chinese history: famine, drought, famine, drought. If we go back to the Red Turban revolts, if we go back to Lai Xixing and the peasant revolt there, it's like continually, because they have bad harvest, it's just a really bad time. This is one of the problems with China today. They actually import a lot of their stuff for growing and food too. And so there is a strain on the government, the economy, agriculture. And after the Qianlong Emperor's death, the government is poorly mismanaged and very corrupt. And so again, if we go back to Confucian ideology, it's almost as if the government has lost the mandate of heaven. Remember that? This is something continually throughout Chinese history. When stuff is going bad, obviously the celestial bureaucracy and the government are not intertwined. And so they have lost the mandate of heaven, and thus there must be revolt and rebellion, the White Lotus Rebellion, right? Okay, very good. Now, the White Lotus Rebellion is finally put down after 8 years, but it is almost like the beginning of the end for the Qing dynasty. They're weakened and in disarray after having to put down millions, a revolt by millions of Buddhists and their followers in southern China. And so here's the Qianlong Emperor in a depiction of the White Lotus Rebellion and their taking of a fort in southern China. But it was also taking L's at home. Not only taking L's at home, but also L's abroad. So not only do they have rebellion, but they also have terrible foreign relations. Of course, China is still practicing mercantilism and trade protectionism. If you remember last time when we stopped talking about China, they had instituted a very isolationist policies that they were closed off from the world. They could only trade at select ports, including Canton, the port you need to know. And there's that same map we looked at last time with Canton. And China had very high tariffs on goods that did come in, which were very few. And traditionally, of course, China had a monopoly on the silk trade and porcelain, which we call China because it comes from there. And those were still very popular, but a new addictive drink called tea, yes, that British love, is like the most important commodity China has now. And China institutes these mercantilist policies where they will trade these goods, very limited, if any, Western goods, and they will only accept silver, bullion. Remember, mercantilism, we need all the wealth we can get because there's a fixed amount. And so they're racking up the silver and they're making all the money. And the Western powers like Britain and France, who really want silk, porcelain, and tea, they're like, dang, we're really losing out on this deal. The trade is imbalanced because of China's protectionist, mercantilist, isolationist policies. If you remember, they also banned Christianity, right? And so, like, there's hardly any Western influence up until about 1800. And so Great Britain in 1793 will send an ambassador there, George Macartney. And we call this the Macartney Mission or the Macartney Embassy. And he goes directly to the Qianlong Emperor. There's a depiction of one of his messengers here to see about setting up an embassy, so getting some trade deals done. And the British would really like an island base outside Canton. Here's Canton, some islands out here on the in the delta of the river. You see here the Chinese harvesting tea. And so what do you think the Qianlong Emperor says? Well, this is what he says, 1792, his reply: hitherto, all European nations, including your own country's barbarian merchants, have carried on their trade with our celestial empire at Canton. Such has been the procedure for many years, although our celestial empire possesses all things in prolific abundance and lacks no product within its own borders. There was therefore no need to import the manufactures of outside barbarians in exchange for our own produce. But as the tea, silk, and porcelain, which the celestial empire produces, are absolute necessities to European nations and to yourselves, we have permitted, as a signal mark of favor, that foreign merchants should be established at Canton, so that your wants might be supplied and your country thus participate in our beneficence. Wow. This is very condescending, right? From the Qianlong Emperor. He says, we have everything we need. We don't need anything from you, yet you love our tea, silk, and porcelain. And we're so nice to let you even show up in Canton. Okay, well, think about the British at this time. We've talked about their explosion, 1792, militarily, industrially. What do? Well, this is very funny, actually. This is from a British foreign policy in an age of revolution, 1783 to 1793. This is a secondary source. Listen to this. The ritual of the kowtow, remember us talking about that, the kowtow, laying prostrate on the ground, which requires an individual to kneel with both knees on the ground and bow so as to touch their forehead to the ground, presented a particular dilemma. The kowtow was required not only when meeting the emperor, but also when receiving imperial edicts from his messengers. While Portuguese and Dutch merchants in Canton had acquiesced to the ritual, British subjects who regarded the act as slavish and humiliating generally avoided kowtowing to the emperor's edicts by leaving the room when such messages were received. For Macartney, one sticking point was the relative status of the two sovereigns, George III and Qianlong. Macartney believed that Britain was now the most powerful nation on earth. However, as a diplomat, he had decided that whatever ceremony he participated in must present the two monarchs as equals. And thus he would only show Qianlong the same level of respect he would show his own king. He saw the kowtow as too excessive. Throughout his meetings with Chinese officials, Macartney was repeatedly urged to perform the kowtow during his audience with the emperor. And I read this and it goes on, and he actually will just do like a curtsy like they would do in England, and he refuses to do the kowtow. And so they're not on good terms immediately, right? And so right off the bat, an attempt is made, and it is a fail. China says, we don't need any of your stuff. What? We are the celestial kingdom. We are the middle kingdom. But then Britain's like, we're the best country on earth. And so we have come to loggerheads, right? So this is really the beginning of the end for China, quite honestly. So the Qianlong Emperor tells the UK to go pound sand, and they have held on to this past idea that goes back to the beginning of like the Song Dynasty, that China is the middle kingdom, that they are surrounded by desert and mountains, of course, and everyone around them is barbarians who come to the middle kingdom to get the, as they said, the beneficence, all the good stuff of the empire, that they are the height of civilization, or the shining civilization, right? Surrounded by the barbarians like the UK. But the problem is China is already way behind. Their military is garbage. They're still using like wooden ships. Their soldiers still fight with swords and spears in the gunpowder age. Remember when we talked about gunpowder empires? Interestingly enough, China was not one of them. They do have gunpowder technology. It's where it was invented, of course, but still very limited. And China was in a cultural and scientific decline, right? This isn't the Song Dynasty. This isn't the Ming Dynasty. They had fallen behind. So, of course, the United Kingdom is very pressed, and they say, okay, well, if you won't give us it, we'll take it, right? And they begin to embark on economic imperialism. And it is at this time that the UK will make great advances in military technology to take what they want, like the invention of the dreadnought, the all-steel battleship with huge guns. Well, they will practice gunboat diplomacy. We'll just show up with our ships and we'll take what we want, right? Now, you have seen this political cartoon before. I know we showed it before when we just talked about using political cartoons. But you have here the pie or the pizza, whatever, and it says China, right? And you have depictions of the various countries who are trying to get a piece. And then the guy in the back, he's obviously Chinese. Wait, hold on. Well, you messed up, dude. You could have worked with us, but now we're just going to cut it up and take what we want. Queen Victoria here represents England. The pickle hob, the helmet here, remember that's Germany. France is the lady here. This is Japan. Russia in the green. So China has the Fu Manchu, the Qiyu right here. So, and what will eventually happen is the Qing dynasty will be divided up into spheres of influence. Remember, you must know that term. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. But what will eventually happen is the Western powers will work together and say, this is our part where our rules, our military's in charge. This is our part where we get to trade, and that's eventually what happens. The green is what is nominally under Chinese control, but they're surrounded by various spheres of influence where other countries like Russia, Japan, France, England, they have where they really run the show, right? So the UK has a plan. They are growing in India poppy seeds that are highly addictive. We call this opium. And it is eaten, it's ingested, but it's smoked. This is how it was used. It was smoked. It had been smoked by different people in places across history. But the Chinese really, really liked it, kind of like how the British like tea. It was like, we're going to switch everything around on you, right? And so the UK will actually start flooding in. It had been coming in for some time, but especially hard, this very addictive opium. And so the Chinese love opium, so they're paying for it with their silver. In fact, it was so much that the silver flow was actually net negative. That silver was flowing out of China for opium more than it was coming in for tea, silk, and porcelain, because it was so addictive. In fact, it was so bad that at any given time, like millions of people would be literally too high to work or to farm. And so by 1839, the Qing Trade Commissioner, like the person who's in charge of the trade relations and negotiations at Canton, his name was Lin Zishu. This is a depiction of him. He's considered still today like a national hero in China for standing up to the foreign powers, right? He says he goes personally to Queen Victoria. He writes what's called the Lin Zishu Memorial, I believe that's what it's called. And he begs them to get their military involved to shut down the opium trade. But they say no. Of course, you wouldn't make a deal with us 40 years ago, 30 years ago. Why should we make a deal with you? So he says, okay, bet. So he goes into British storehouses in Canton. You need to know this. Some of these European storehouses, huge acres of facilities, are sometimes called factories. If you remember when we looked at SAQ2 from last year that stumped so many people, it's because it said European factories in Beijing or whatever. It's not factories like the factory system, the production of goods. It was just a term they used, and it really what is the storehouses, warehouses. Anyway, he goes into these factories, these warehouses, and he orders his officials to confiscate the opium, and they bury it, burn it, and throw it into the ocean. Okay, we're talking like you guys in the modern drug war, this stuff's very expensive. If you take a warehouse of crack cocaine that the cartel, or in this case, Britain, floods in, and you go and destroy it, you think they're gonna be happy? No, no, they're out a lot of money. And so they're enraged and they actually declare war. We call this the First Opium War. I don't know why I don't have that bolded. That was one of the things you need to know. Sorry, 1839 to 1842. China gets their butt kicked. The UK easily wins. They have modern guns, boats, technology. China's still fighting with the big, not junk, yunks. They still use yunks to fight, seriously. And they're just destroyed. And this leads to the Treaty of Nanking. This is the first and only one you need to know. What historians call unequal treaties, where China got their butt kicked, and so they're going to be very lopsided treaties. They're unequal. They're not fair, right? And so the Treaty of Nanking sets up some very important stuff. I don't know why you can't see the map. That's hopefully you can see it. You see where it says Hong Kong? It's at the bottom. It's an island just south of Canton. But the Treaty of Nanking gives Hong Kong, the peninsula, they called it Kowloon, and the islands around it to the British. And the British will actually have it until, I think, 1997 or 1999, a long time. It's a very important base and military base, trading post there. In fact, if you go to Hong Kong today, I mean, there's people there that look Asian. They're of Chinese descent, but there's people that look like me too. And they speak English and have a British accent because it was English until 20 years ago, right? But the Treaty of Nanking says, give us Hong Kong. You wouldn't do that in the beginning. Lower tariffs because we're about to push in some goods. And you've got to open more ports to foreign trade. And eventually more unequal treaties come. And they say the opium trade is legalized. Now they're about to make money. And people are just going big time addicted in China. And you've got to grant foreign concessions to us and other countries. What's a foreign concession? Well, it's like Hong Kong on steroids. It's those spheres of influence. They would say something like so many miles of the coast here, including cities, are under the control, are conceded to the United Kingdom. And so in these foreign concessions, it wasn't Chinese law that was in charge. It was English law that was in charge, or French law, French money, the French language, the French religion. It was imperialism. They were colonies, but by another name, economic imperialism, foreign concessions. So there's opium, that's the poppy. And they still, this is a modern picture. Again, this is coming from British India, which included Pakistan and Bangladesh and parts of modern day Afghanistan. They still grow this today in those places, right? It's very profitable. You wonder why we're at war in these places. So you can see here opium imports into China. Like I said, this is by tons. They were being imported, right? But look, Lin Zexu throws a fit in 1839. Look here, it's really starting to take off. And then by this time it's legalized and it is just full bore. This is tons of opium. And they would, I'll show you a picture here. They would just smoke a little bit and they actually mixed it with water and they would inhale it kind of like a vape. You'll see here. But here is the first opium war. Look at the Chinese. I mean, they're way behind. Look, they're using forks, like they have guns, yeah, but look, they're fighting with swords and spears. You may also notice the guns for our military guys, I know I've mentioned this before, are flintlock muzzle loaders. You can tell it's a muzzleloader if it has a stick under the barrel. That's called the ramrod. And so, because they had to put it in and ram it down, right? They're using muzzleloaders in the 1840s when breech loading, like modern guns that use a cartridge, have been around. And so the British are using them, and they don't have I mean, you're coming at me with a modern gun, and here's a spear. For real? What? So they would get their butt kicked. Okay, yeah, here's the smoking of the opium. And so you can kind of see what they did. It's like I mean, it's like a bong is effectively what it is, where water and, I don't know, but where water and the opium was mixed. And then they would, inhale it, or they would even put it in like a vape, a pen, and they would smoke it as well. But they would do other stuff. They would make tar and rub it on their gums and, all sorts of stuff. But this is a depiction of the British warehouse in Canton that Lin Zexu went in and confiscated. This is all opium. Look at this. I mean, it's like that scene in Harry Potter where they go and they find those. I've just seen the movie one time, but they go into that big place and it's all the balls and stuff. You guys may know what I'm talking about. But it's big. It's a big warehouse, right? And they would all, remember, they also call these factories. Nothing's being made here, just another term for those storehouses. Here's a depiction of those foreign concessions. Look at the big Chinese yunk here, but then look at the European flags. So these are the different European concessions. Little, the little Netherlands, little Norway and Sweden. It is pretty weird. Some of them be big, some of them be small. But these buildings are those storehouses, those factories. These are the foreign concessions there. There's a British boat. And this is Canton. This is Canton. Okay, they also have other problems at home. So in like 1859, 1860, the same time as the U.S. Civil War, there was a civil war in China called the Taiping Rebellion. This is a millenarian revolt as well. It's led by a guy, his name is Hong Jiquan. Here he is right here. And he was actually raised by British missionary tutors who raised him up in a Christian way and exposed him to like Enlightenment thinking and feminism and stuff like that. He would end up having some visions where he said he was Jesus Christ's younger brother. And he was destined to establish a Taiping, or the heavenly kingdom of supreme peace. Now, a lot of people listened to him. He was very charismatic, a magnetic leader. And he appealed to the poor, the peasants, the working class, right? He was also against foot binding. Remember us talking about foot binding? And so a lot of women and stuff got kind of in on it as well, especially the rural class who felt they had to bind their feet to get a good husband. Remember us talking about that? And so Christian, feminist, enlightened thinking, then there's the whole I'm Jesus's brother and let's go to war thing. Okay. So to get to the heavenly kingdom of supreme peace, 20 million people had to die. And then there was no heavenly kingdom of supreme peace. Some historians debate if it's like the second or even the deadliest war in history. There's World War II, and we're better on those numbers. But this is something that's happening in rural China in 1860. And the best guess we can do is 20 million people dead. Now, this is bad. This isn't like World War II, we drop bombs, tens of thousands are dead like that. This is 5-6 years of, again, you saw spears, swords, civil war in the Chinese countryside. So what I'm saying is brutal, and the number could be wrong because we're not good at counting numbers from a place like that at a time like that. It could even be more than 20 million. It's eventually put down by the Qing government and foreigners. The Qing has to, you need to know that, the Qing has to actually ask the foreigners to come in and help them put this rebellion down. If you have to ask for help in a fight, you think they're just going to do it for free? No. And so they get some more stuff out of this. And so the Qing say, okay, we have got to do something. We've got to attempt some reform. And that leads to some reform, the self-strengthening movement. So they put it down. Hong Jiquan actually kills himself. And the government that same year initiates the self-strengthening movement, which will last for roughly 20 years. But it's not very effective. And this reaction to the Taiping Rebellion and the foreign influence is really pushed by this middle class and the like the bureaucracy, not from the top. So the difference in, we'll talk about the Meiji restoration later, is that it was a top-down approach. You do this or you're dead. We will industrialize, we will modernize. That was not the case in the self-strengthening movement, and thus its failure. It only pursued and got some modest economic and military modernization. You see some modern guns, and some modern navy, battleships, absolutely. It's not going to be, it's too little too late, though, especially with modernizing UK and Japan, who will make light work of this soon enough. But like I said, the self-strengthening movement was doomed to fail because those at the top did not want it. And the real person who's in charge is the Dowager Empress Cixi. Now look here, this is very interesting. She's has the silk on and the big hat. She's obviously someone of wealth. She started out as a concubine. She was a sex slave of the emperor. But then she attained power as she was the head concubine. And she attained this power, and her nephew was actually in charge, the Hongshu emperor. But because he was emperor when he was young, she was like the regent. She was really calling the shots. Well, she never let him take power. And they would both die the same year in that whole 1908. And the whole time, she's really the person in charge. But you see her, the lotus foot, she did, the foot binding there. You also see her big nails. That is something. But that's having, again, the lotus feet. If they have small feet, of course, they can't work with those. So I don't have to work, right? If you have long fingernails, you can't work with those. I don't have to work. It's all their status symbols, the foot binding, the long fingernails. Of course, in China still today, a lot of this, these social cues, how we look, they still consider them very important. So in China, you want to be very white. To be tan is not cool because it shows that you have to be outside and work. In China, being fat is a status symbol because you have money to eat. And so it's just kind of, in America, we want to look like we struggle, right? So we want to have tan skin and be skinny, but that's the opposite in China. And so anyway, just looking at this, very interesting. You see the lotus feet, the long fingernails, the rich apparel. It's very interesting there. Anyway, she is behind the self-strengthening movement. And actually, Hongshu Emperor in like 1898, I could be wrong on the year, he will attempt some reforms behind her back. They call it the 100 Days Reform, the 100 Days Movement. In less than 100 days, it's put down. And she actually will arrest him. And the bureaucracy, his advisors and stuff that were trying to implement this stuff, they're all killed. They're all killed. So she's very conservative, very repressive, wants to go back to the glory days of China, but can't get there because she won't move ahead, right? Though there is minimal military and economic industrialization. But because there's no real social change, it fails. We'll look in Japan, in the Meiji Restoration, there's change in every field, right? Think about the Ottoman Empire's Tanzimat reforms. Mildly successful, but because those in charge, the Sultan Abdul Hamid II, didn't really want it, it didn't work. Wow, that's some good comparison right there. And so China will face continued humiliation. Of course, their reforms, the self-strengthening movement fails. Their tributary system starts to fall away. Vietnam will take what they call French Indochina. Not Vietnam. France will take French Indochina, which contains Vietnam. And they'll hold on to this until like World War II, right? So Japan is heavily industrializing the Meiji Restoration. We'll look at that here in a second. And they go and take on China. They get some islands from China. But in the Sino-Japanese War, 1894, 1895, sometimes called the First Sino-Japanese War, because some historians call the first part of World War II in the Asian Pacific theater, Second Sino-Japanese War. For this class, we'll just call it World War II. Anyway, the first one, Japan will take Korea and Taiwan. Korea and Taiwan have been tributary parts of China. And Korea has a dynasty in place called the Joseon dynasty. You don't need to know that. But they are a tribute state of China. They had wanted independence for a long time, for sure. They just weren't strong enough. And so, like, initially, Japan kind of, oh, we're your liberator. Just kidding. We're going to hold on to you. And they hold on to Korea until World War II. It'll be a tribute state of Japan after it's a tribute state of China. And Korea, the peninsula, is not free until the 1950s, if you can say that. And then after that, it's divided into North and South Korea. So interesting that that modern issue we deal with today comes all the way back to the Sino-Japanese War of 1894. Now, the United States does not have a sphere of influence. They do, after 1898, control the Philippines and Guam, but those are too far away. They don't have a direct sphere of influence in China. They won't go that far. However, the Secretary of State, his name's John Hay, he issues a diplomatic memorandum which says he intends to protect and seek for open access to all countries to China. So you can't just carve up China into little colonies. We have to have all the Western powers have to be on the same page as far as keeping an open door to China for trade. And we call this the US's open door policy. So equal access to Chinese markets for all. And it allows, here's the thing, it's like, okay, we're going to help China, but we're really not helping China. We're just saying the US is on board with what's going on as far as economic imperialism. So no one's really helped in this open door policy. It's really kind of like it's in 1899. It's the final nail in the coffin for China. China won't make it 12 more years. The Qing dynasty won't. Here's a political cartoon from Puck putting his foot down. So here is Uncle Sam, the United States. Here is, remember, see a big guy with the top hat, that's Bull. This one is easier. He's in green, that's Russia. This cartoon's nice because it gives us each person's name. You know, that's really good. But here's France, right? They have the big old hat, the pickle hob, that's Germany, but it tells us that. Italy. And in the back, that's Austria. He's getting his scissors sharpened. But look, putting his foot down. What are they going to do with the map of China? Yes, they're going to carve it up. But Uncle Sam says, no, you can't carve it up. We need an open door for everyone. They're like, oh, okay. And that's it? Yeah, that's it. So instead of carving it up into colonies, there's an open door for everyone. So it's like we're all just going to have our spheres of influence there. The U.S. is trying to strut its stuff, right? The U.S. doesn't have a concession, a foreign concession, or a Hong Kong over here. So they say, well, we're going to make a deal with China and we're all going to work together. And they're like, okay, as long as you're cool with it, right? Now look at this French political cartoon. Look at the fish here. Everyone's fishing. It's Korea. It's Korea. The fish is Korea. Now look what we got going on here. We have China, right? Because of the Q in the hat. This guy's Chinese. What's this guy? He's Japanese. And then on the top here, you have Russia. They're not fishing. They're too far away, right? And so is Korea going to go to Japan or to China? And so this is talking about the Sino-Japanese War. And so Japan, of course, will eventually get Korea. China will lose Korea, the fish. And so the Battle of the Yellow Sea, 1894. Look at this piece of Japanese art. This is a woodblock print here, ukiyo-e print. Remember that term? This is a battle between Japan and China, a naval battle. There's those ships, right, that Meiji did have built during the self-strengthening movement. They're all getting blown up, though. And so just look at this depiction. This is Japanese. It shows the technological might of the Japanese Navy, right? Also, if anyone, I'm not into it, I just know this for historical purposes. If anyone's into anime or like manga art, I mean, it has its origins in that's why we learn about the ukiyo-e woodblock style. You can kind of tell with the shading and how the faces and stuff look. I like this art. It is pretty, you know, in an artistic way, I guess. But anyway, the technological and military superiority of Japan over China's attempts at modernization and the self-strengthening movement, not enough, right? Look at this depiction. These are Chinese generals surrendering to Japan at the Battle of Pyongyang in Korea, land battle there. Look at this, take a second. Notice how the Japanese generals are dressed. They look like Western, modern, generals. In China, that's not the case, right? And do you think they look very happy? No, they look, please have mercy on us, right? But look at the Japanese guys. They're like, whatever, dude. So again, this is a Japanese woodblock as well. And it shows with Yowie, and it shows, I think in this, they're on their knees, they're begging, but the strong, modern Japanese generals here, it shows the dichotomy, it shows the difference between the two. You could certainly see something like this on the exam. And of course, there's the political cartoon again. Now that you understand the backstory, here's the spheres of influence map. This is China by the time of the Chinese Revolution, 1912. You can see here's Japan, they've taken Korea, they've taken Taiwan, and then you see the spheres of influence of the different countries. So Great Britain, there's Shanghai, which they have a lot of concessions in, the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Company. Watch the economics video, read the economics section. Hong Kong, right? French, because they control French Indochina, so their sphere of influence is here. Here is British India, and so their sphere, and Burma they control, right? These are colonies of theirs. And so in the Himalayas, Bhutan and Tibet, that's in their sphere of influence. Now, Russia has a sphere of influence in the northern part of China, but it's in conflict with who? Japan. So they both have interest over Manchuria, Korea, other places in China. And so Russia and Japan, they're about to come to blows. Keep that in mind. There's the Philippines. The U.S. doesn't have a direct sphere of influence, so the open door policy. Some people have asked before, Mr. Rivet, what's this, little German part? The Germans have a port at Tsingtao, which they'll control until after World War I. So they do have a sphere of influence there. Russia does get a little bit of this Manchuria, this contested part, because they lease from China Port Arthur. So remember, Russia's always had a problem. They need warm water ports that don't freeze in the winter. They finally got it under Catherine the Great, 1790s, in modern day Poland. They controlled all that. And so they got their port, warm water port, in the European part, in the West. However, in the Pacific, where they're growing Siberian stuff, they don't have one. They have, and still today, they don't have one. They have Vladivostok, though in the winter, it's icy and stuff. It's not the best one. So they actually lease Port Arthur from China, and they're able to use that instead. Japan does not want the Russian, and so the Russian Navy, that's their Pacific base. Japan does not want the Russian Navy situated right here. They want total control of this. And so they actually request Russia to do something about it. Russia says, whatever, we're not doing that, bro. And so you'll actually see the red is at the Qing dynasty's greatest extent, and that will be carved down to this tan in 50, 40 years. Now, they're not done with having problems of their own. There's another millenarian revolt called the Boxer Rebellion. You may have learned this in U.S. history as well. It was actually called like the Society for the Harmonious and Righteous Fist or something. We call it the Boxer Rebellion because that's easier to say. A lot of the people who led it were martial artists and used those skills. But these were people who were upset by foreign concessions, foreign interference and influence, famine and unemployment, and general Chinese decline, right? They believed that certain rituals would actually protect them from bullets. We hear that all the time, right? Ghost dance, the Meiji Rebellion. This is a common theme, right? That the spirits are something of the ancestors. That Confucian spirit, that Confucian ancestor veneration, right? It all goes back to that. That's all I learned about it, Unit 1, that they would actually protect us from bullets. Well, that didn't happen, right? And so initially, because they want to get rid of foreigners and make a strong China, Cixi will actually support it. But then it gets way out of hand. A lot of people follow it, and the Boxers will actually like take over some of these foreign concessions. They go in, they're killing women, killing kids, killing ambassadors, and they like take over the capital at Beijing, other foreign concessions across the country, and it's getting out of control. And the foreigners at the beginning are like, holy cow, we may get driven out. But then they decide to form an alliance. And it's called the Eight Nation Alliance. All of these countries who have foreign concessions in China send in military units and topple and take out the Boxers. They go in, they actually burn Buddhist and Confucian temples, and they force the Qing to give them further concessions and to pay a lot of money back, heavy reparations. So this is finally quelled in like 1901, 1902. It would be just 5 years. In 1908, Cixi dies. And then the Qing dynasty goes into absolute just tailspin. And by 1912, China is no longer a dynasty, it's a republic. We'll get to that next unit though. And you see Boxers here. This is a French execution of Boxers. They are being strangled by their weight. So they would lock their head in and just let gravity strangle them. What a weight. That's bad. The Boxers were also very anti-Christian. So that's why a lot of these people went against the Boxers. And this is an icon, yes, an icon, an Eastern Orthodox icon. There's Jesus. And this is the iconography of Chinese Christians who were killed by the Boxers, who were Eastern Orthodox. Remember, the religion of Russia primarily. And so a lot of Chinese Christians were killed. And so this icon venerates them, the martyrs who died in the Boxer Rebellion, who were Christian, Eastern Orthodox. This painting is called I'll Try, Sir. It shows the 14th Infantry of the U.S. Army attempting to take the castle at Beijing, Peking, and relieve the American delegation there. And so the U.S. is getting involved in China as well, militarily fighting. And so here's a depiction of the Eight Nation. You're like, Mr. River, there's 9 people here. This guy is British, and so is this guy, Eight Nation Alliance. Remember? He has that head wrapping. Does he look white? No. I wonder where he's from. He's a British Indian soldier, right? India's right next door, so they can bring them over. But this is a British soldier. This is an American one. This is a German one. I can tell that by the pickle hob. This guy's French, red pants. The Zouaves, the French. He's French. This guy is Italian. This guy is Russian. This guy is Austrian. Or maybe I have that backwards. This guy may be Russian. This guy may be Austrian. This guy is Italian. I can tell that from the frock on the hat. And this guy is Japanese, right? And those are all the people that had concessions there during the Boxer Rebellion in China. I'm pretty sure, yeah, this guy's a Russian sailor. This guy's Austrian. That's what it is. Okay, let's talk briefly about Japan. So Japan, of course, is under a shogunate. The shogun's like the head samurai. And though the emperor is technically at the top, descendant of the sun, big deal, right? He's really just a figurehead under the shogunate, the Tokugawa shogunate, which has been in place since the 17th century. The shogun really runs the show. And the Japanese caste system, remember, is very rigid, just like the Hindu caste system. And it puts the shogun, okay, so the emperor is kind of separate. It's at the top in this depiction, that's true, but he's kind of separate because he's a god, right? Under the religion of Shinto. He's descendant of the sun. He's a god. He's separate. He's at the top. The shogun is like the head samurai or the head of the landowning samurai class called the daimyo. And then the samurai are like the knights, right? They protect the land holdings of the daimyo in this feudal society. And then under them are the peasants, craftsmen. And at the bottom, other than the elite, not the elite, definitely not the elite. I can't think of the term right now. But it's the outcast, the Talit class in the Hindu caste system. Dalit, I mean, I can't think of it. I'm pretty sure it starts with an E. But there's the untouchables in the Japanese caste and the Hindu caste. Right above them are the merchants. Remember, they don't think highly of like trade and stuff. It's like, why would you do that to make money? That's like stealing. You need to be an elite daimyo, a land owning class. Well, all that's going to change during this period. And then the craftsmen, the merchants, those who make money from wealth by building and creating wealth are going to be the new ruling class. So the Tokugawa shogunate put in place the national seclusion policy. It's still in place up until 1853. And so they are not trading with anyone except at Nagasaki, especially they like the Dutch because the Dutch don't really try to Christianize. And they actually call what learning does come in Dutch learning, scientific and technology stuff. They call it Dutch learning because it probably came from the artificial island of Jima at Nagasaki. And remember, they ban Christianity and persecute Christians. So this is a very secluded place. That doesn't mean it's not culturally vibrant. I have here a depiction of the Great Wave off Kanagawa, right? An ukiyo-e print. You know, it's unique. And I talk about the seclusion and the Christian banning, not defending that. I'm just saying you got to understand the situation. So coming into it, it makes a little more sense. And like I said, it all comes to an end in 1853 when the United States, wanting to cure up its Pacific footing. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this. But the United States is getting involved imperially by this time. And President Millard Fillmore actually dispatches a Navy squadron under Matthew Perry to go and try to open up to Japan, who Japan was not on the United States on terms. They don't want to go to Nagasaki and work with the Dutch and these Japanese laws. They want equal open access. And so he takes his squadron there, guns, this is gunboat diplomacy. And he literally just shows up and says, yeah, we're going to start trading, or you see these guns, right? And it works. They like took a bet and it worked. Here's the thing. The United States was growing and wanted new markets for its goods. And Japan is an island that is very lacking in resources. It's a very rocky volcanic island. They don't have a lot going on there, right? So they need stuff, and the U.S. wants to sell them stuff. And also, you know, the U.S. will soon get involved in Alaska and other islands in the Pacific. So they just want to shore up economically, politically, geographically, the Pacific situation. And this happens under Commodore Matthew Perry in 1853. Here's a depiction of it. Literally, the Japanese, who are still using sailboats and stuff, see these modern steam-powered gunboats pull up in Edo Bay, Tokyo Harbor, and they're like, what is going on here? Now, initially, the shogun didn't want to work with them, though they will make a trade agreement. The Japanese are kind of shocked, right, that the United States came all this way across the Pacific to do this. And there's a coup by several samurai clans who take out the last shogun and put the emperor, who had been around since 1200, but was just a figurehead. They put him at the top now. His name's Meiji, the Meiji emperor. And he's going to be running the show. This is a picture of him in 1873. And again, like in China, his name is not Meiji. It means something like Changshao, Xixi. It means like, you know, glorious peace or something. And that's what they called them. We can't use English style names for them because they didn't have them. So Meiji emperor, and thus they call this period the Meiji Restoration. And they'll call this, some people also call this the Meiji era. And so again, they mark their periods of history by the rule of the emperor. So he will rule until 1912, 1868 to 1912. So they call that, you know, 60 years, the Meiji period, or the Meiji Restoration period. And that's just how they divide their history. Anyway, Meiji Restoration, 1868. It's a restoration because the Meiji emperor is restored to the rightful place as ruler, right? And so those samurais, they take out the weak shogun, they put the emperor back in authority. He'll rule until 1912. So it's like I said, nearly 60 years of radical transformation of Japan. It's very good for Japan, I guess, that for the Meiji Restoration, that he stays alive for all this time. And it's a very top-down approach. So they say caste system, the old feudalism, we're out of here. Samurai, you're basically out. You lose all your privileges. The samurai didn't have to pay taxes. They had like grants to land. They could carry their weapons around. All that changes, right? We're going to modernize. We're not going to be feudal island Japan anymore. We're going to be a new modern nation. Look what he's wearing. This is 1873 in Japan, but he's wearing, 20 years before they didn't have contact with the outside. Matthew Perry shows up. In 20 years, he looks like an English dude, right? He looks like a Western power. Look at the big frock hat. Look at the epaulets. Look at the sword. They modernize very quickly in every way, including how they look. So they start implementing the civil service exam. If we're going to have a military, it needs a government and bureaucracy. It needs to be people who know what they're doing. Industrializing rapidly. The government will promote industrialization through government-owned, basically, companies called zaibatsu. Modern military, they invite Britain and Germany and the United States. There's a good movie about this called The Last Samurai. It's highly fictitious, but some good points there. On the military modernization, organizational methods, weapons, ships, stuff like that. And they'll actually promulgate a constitution. It's called the Constitution of 1890, and it will stay in place up until World War II. Though it's kind of weak, it does establish a parliament called the Diet, but the emperor rules by decree if he wants to, right? And they actually will make Shinto the state religion. Again, another attempt to unify, like in China they did with Confucianism. Shinto, if you remember, we briefly mentioned it a long time ago. Shinto is an animist religion, very like East Asia and Africa, where there's spirits of the ancestor veneration and spirits in nature, spiritism, animism. And they make this the state religion, and it highly venerates the emperor, who is a descendant of the spirit of the sun, who's a descendant of the sun. They literally believe, in fact, look at the Japanese flag at this time. You have the rising sun, the red rising sun. I should have put a picture on here. Red rising sun, and then the rays. To symbolize him, they believe the emperor literally descended from the sun. So he's like a spirit being. He's a god, right, who is running the show here. If that doesn't help centralize power, I don't know what will. And people believe this. Again, we must think historically, contextually and fairly. People still believe this. And this is very prominent, World War I and World War II. People are willing to die for them because they believe the emperor, at that time, Hirohito, is a god. However, taxes do increase. Their industrialization sees the same problems as other ones. Bad working conditions. You guys read the Japanese industry bit. Bad working conditions, poor pay, though all of this is quickly fixed, near the end of this unit. It's still very patriarchal. Just because Shinto is a state religion doesn't mean they don't hold on to that Buddhist and Confucian ideas that had really ingrained themselves for the past, 500 years, right? We talked about Zen Buddhism in Japan. It's still a thing today. And it doesn't mean just because Shinto is a state religion, those ideas of the patriarchy, the male dominance doesn't exist. In fact, the Constitution of 1890 really doesn't make a lot of protections for women. Women are not voting, in fact. A lot of men aren't voting. Less than 5% are actually voting in the parliamentary system. So though there are advances democratically, like I said, the emperor really runs the show. Not a lot of people are voting. The Diet, the parliament's limited. It's, again, in history, good and bad, yes and no, hot, cold, right? Though, because taxes are increased, education is expanded greatly. Western dress and manners in many places take off and are forced, even, as you can see in this picture here, the emperor is wearing Western clothing, right? They will use Western language. They will learn English and stuff like this. It would not be uncommon for a Japanese person to speak multiple languages, especially if they're in the upper class. And military spending explodes. New battleships, new weapons, new organization techniques. And they want to try that military out. You can see here a depiction of the modern Japanese military wearing Western style clothes. You can see here, this is the Tokyo Arsenal. So we're making guns, we're making Look, but we also have telegraph wires now. We have railroads. They're industrial. This is a canal. They're industrializing very fast. Here's a depiction of the diet. Again, these Japanese people are in Western clothes in a Western style government setting. They're industrializing quick, the Meiji restoration. So, and yeah, they want to try that new military out, right? So China grants them foreign concessions, but they get even more after the Sino-Japanese War we talked about, the first one, remember? And so they take Taiwan, which is right here, they call Formosa, and they'll take Korea. Now, look at this cartoon. This is a Japanese cartoon. You see this big octopus, right? It says Russia. And look, they've squashed Finland, they've squashed Poland, Armenia, Turkestan. Its tentacles are everywhere, right? But look what's happening over here in Manchuria and Korea, the tentacle coming down through Siberia. And here's Japan. What are they going to do? And look at China. Ooh, get off me. Get that tentacle off me. Korea's looking towards Japan for help. Oh, we got to help them, right? And see, that's the thing. Russia's the big octopus. Its tentacles are going everywhere. So is this Japanese cartoon pro-Russia or anti-Russia? Yeah, it's anti-Russia. And so look, Japan's got to step in and save Korea and Manchuria with the nasty Russian tentacle, right? And so that's what happens. So Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905, Japan will defeat the Russia that Ivan the Terrible, that Peter the Great, that Catherine the Great had built up into like this land-based superpower is defeated by Japan, who wasn't even until 1853 wasn't even open. This is the first large-scale conflict in the modern era where a non-Western state, Japan, defeats a European power. See, Russia wanted this Manchuria, this Korea. Remember, they wanted the warm water port, right? They were leasing Port Arthur, but they wanted more. They don't want to lease, they just want control. But so does Japan. They want this area. And so rather than work together, the Tsar at the time, Nicholas II, he says, okay, we're going to throw hands then. But here's the thing, Japan is equipped and trained just as well now after the Meiji restoration. And then Russia, whose base of operations is here in Moscow and in the kind of industrial European heartland, is having to fight this massive war over here. And they struggle to supply the war effort with the Trans-Siberian Railway. Without that, there wouldn't have been a chance. But Japan like obliterates them within a year. And so Russia actually has to sue for peace. And if you've taken U.S. history, you may have discussed this. The president is Teddy Roosevelt, and he invites the Russians and the Japanese to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, the Treaty of Portsmouth. And Roosevelt gets a Nobel Peace Prize for situating this. But anyway, what happens is Japan is like the top dog in the East. And Russia's taken a critical blow. Russia will not exist for another, as we know Russia, the Russian Revolution happens in less than 20 years. They were beaten by Japan, a country that was using samurais 50 years before. And so, yeah, here's the situation in the East. Here's Russia, Siberia, the Trans-Siberian Railway. There's Vladivostok. But here's Port Arthur, which they were renting from China. So in the Sino-Japanese War, Japan takes Korea, right? They don't want a Russian naval base right here. They don't want Russia's tentacle coming down here, right? So they actually do a surprise invasion of Port Arthur, destroy the fleet there, win some major battles here on the peninsula against the Russians. And so what the Russians do is they have a fleet over here, the Baltic Sea Fleet and the Black Sea Fleet that are in the European part. Again, this is where all this is happening. And they send them all the way around just to get their butt kicked. They go on this huge, year-long journey to get there, and they're destroyed. That's the Battle of Tsushima Strait. The Japanese just totally own them on land and on sea. And here's the Tsar at the time, Tsar Nicholas II. He loved to play tennis. And it is during a tennis game, it was his favorite sport. It It was during a tennis game that his advisors told him, yeah, our fleet that we sent around from Europe was destroyed as well. And like he just crumbled up the note and kept playing. And so, I mean, Russia's in decline. It got its butt kicked. Japan is, I mean, Japan is the new kid on the block, right? Just running the show here. China took a fat L as well. That is East Asia. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Make sure you watch this, take notes, and I'll have some more videos out soon enough.